So, here it is, the lecture you've been waiting for, the very last one for the Anatomy and Physiology series. And with it, we are going to wrap up the endocrine system by talking about the activity and the functions of the adrenal gland, the pancreas, the pineal gland, and the thymus, and then just a brief view of all of the organs that have a secondary endocrine function. That is, they have a primary function, but they also produce endocrine secretions. And we'll start with the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are located superior to the kidneys, and they're composed of two parts. There's the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. The adrenal glands are roughly pyramid-shaped, and if you slice into them, they're composed of two different layers. The adrenal medulla is the center part, and the adrenal cortex is the rind or the outer layer. And the adrenal medulla produces the hormones that we associate with the fight or flight division of the autonomic nervous system. If you recall, that is the sympathetic division, the one that gets the body activated for activity and shuts down a lot of the digestive, the urinary functions, so that the energy can be focused on the muscles and on power and being able to get lots of oxygen to produce a lot of ATP. The two hormones that are associated with this fight or flight response are epinephrine and norepinephrine. And we constantly produce epinephrine and norepinephrine at low levels, so that it works along with the thyroid gland to help maintain basal metabolism, that the activity of the cell producing sufficient ATP to keep the cell active, or cells at appropriate level of activity. But under neural stimulation, under that sympathetic stimulation provided, we see a dramatic increase in epinephrine and norepinephrine secretion. And the effects of it are, what we associate with getting excited, being scared, or being frightened by something, or being angry. We see increases in epinephrine and norepinephrine. And so as a result of the secretion, heart rate and force both increase dramatically, as well as the rate and depth of respiration. And in the cells that are targets, and by the way, almost every cell responds as a target to epinephrine, in the cells we see an increase in mobilization of glycogen. So we break glycogen down, and we use the glucose that's provided by the metabolism of glycogen to produce ATP. And this results in increased muscle power and increased endurance of the muscles. And we also see a decrease in digestive system activity as a result of epinephrine secretion. So at the same time that we're shutting down the digestive activity neurologically with sympathetic control, we also see hormonal inhibition of digestive system activity. This is the most rapid acting of the endocrine secretions, with peak effect coming just 30 seconds after release. Response is felt almost immediately, but peak response is about 30 seconds after the first release of epinephrine. And as we talked about before, these rapid acting hormones are also rapidly removed from the body, broken down by enzymes, and so their effect only lasts several minutes, and then we begin to calm down again, and heart rate and breathing are restored to normal functions. So those secretions are associated with, or are associated with the medulla, and again, it is neural stimulation that really produces that rapid increase in epinephrine production, rather than any kind of neurological stimulation. I'm sorry, rather than rather than a hormone controlling it, it's the brain. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so hormones of the adrenal cortex now. There's a whole bunch of hormone and hormone-like substances. More than 30 steroids are produced by the adrenal cortex, the outer rind of the adrenal gland. And we can classify them roughly into 3 different categories. There are the mineral corticoids, cort because we're talking about secretion from the cortex, the mineral corticoids, the glucocorticoids, and the androgens. Mineral corticoids all regulate the concentration of mineral electrolytes in the blood. The glucocorticoids affect glucose metabolism, and the androgens, these andro means man, so an android is a man-like machine. Androgens are the sex hormones that are produced in the testes. So 3 different classes. We're going to look at each of these classes separately in the following slides, but 3 different classes of hormones that are produced by the cortex. And these are vital to the body, especially, both the mineral corticoids and the glucocorticoids. They're busy controlling sodium. The mineral the primary, we'll talk about them in just a minute, but they are absolutely essential to body function. And if there becomes an issue with secreting the mineral or glucocorticoids, then that's a life-threatening situation. So the mineral corticoids, the primary one is called aldosterone. You can definitely tell with this sterone, you can tell that is a steroid hormone. And it regulates the concentrations of sodium and potassium in the blood. Aldosterone is secreted if sodium gets too low or if potassium becomes too high. And its effects are all about conserving sodium and removing potassium from the body. So with low sodium, we're going to see reabsorption of sodium at the renal tubule, and we have sodium and potassium in the body fluids, the exocrine body fluids. And so aldosterone will reduce the amount of sodium found in sweat, saliva, and all the exocrine digestive secretions. At the same time that we are conserving sodium, we are losing or secreting potassium into urine and into sweat, saliva, and digestive secretions. And along the way, as we regulate the amount of sodium that's in the body, we also will see water being retained. So sodium is conserved, potassium is lost, and water winds up being retained along with the sodium. Glucocorticoids, these are the hormones that are responsible for regulating blood glucose and not regulating blood glucose. Let me walk that back in for a second, because that would be insulin and glucagon. But when we are low on blood glucose, the glucocorticoids are going to provide alternative sources of glucose to the body. So cortisol is one of the more important of the glucocorticoids. Cortisol is also called hydrocortisone. That's the same hormone. and it's released in response to adrenal corticotropic hormone. So that's one of the pituitary gland tropic hormones. And as blood glucose falls, and if glycogen is not being broken down in sufficient amounts from the liver to support blood glucose again in response to glucagon, then we see cortisol released. And what cortisol has three primary effects. The first is that it releases amino acids. It increases the supply of amino acids in the blood. So in response to cortisol, we break down proteins in order to increase amino acid supplies in the blood. We also then break down fats from adipose tissue and use the fatty acids to make ATP. So if a protein is just a long chain of amino acids, then we break up the peptide bonds, and now we have amino acids available to the body. If a triglyceride is that 3-carbon backbone glycerol connected to a long chain of carbons. Remember, fatty acids are just a long chain of carbon. They may or may not have double bonds between the carbons. So we break off the fatty acid here and release it into the blood, and then use the fatty acids to make ATP. Now we're left with the glycerol, and we have all these amino acids. The third is that we can synthesize glucose using, that's not oxygen, of course, that's the amino acid, that's nitrogen. We can use glycerol plus amino acids to make glucose. So in response to cortisol, we're going to see glucose levels rise, and we'll be able to make energy from alternative sources than sugars. And glucose then can be used, to run body systems. So cortisol is very important, and it is one of the stress hormones. So in response to stress, what we'll see in the body is the release of cortisol to help provide energy to deal with whatever those stressful circumstances are. And then the last class of adrenal hormones are the androgens. So this provides the source of testosterone in females, and it's an additional source of testosterone to men. And as these testosterone and other androgens are being released into the blood, then some of them are converted into estrogen. So for men, this is the ultimate source of the estrogens that are found in the body. Okay, so we've talked about the adrenal glands, onto the pancreas. Now, in the book there is an image of the pancreas. This is one of the images that I expected you to learn for labeling, showing the pancreatic islets. The pancreas is found behind the stomach, and as you recall from digestion, it produces a lot of exocrine secretions, the digestive enzymes that are used in intestinal lipase, intestinal amylase are released by the pancreas. But sprinkled in among the exocrine gland tissues are clusters of cells called pancreatic islets, or they are also called the islets of Langerhans. And inside these pancreatic islets, we see alpha cells, beta cells, and delta cells. So those are the three types of cells that produce, each of them producing a different secretion. The alpha cells produce glucagon, the beta cells produce insulin, and the delta cells produce a hormone called somatostatin. And we'll see the functions of all three. Hopefully you are totally on board with, or totally clued in to alpha and beta cells. It's the alpha cells that secrete glucagon. So when blood glucose is low, glucagon helps to stimulate, glucagon stimulates an increase in glucose. Low blood sugar, by the way, is hypoglycemia. So it prevents blood glucose by stimulating the liver to break down glycogen into the component glucose, and to then release that glucose into the blood. And if there is no glucose, then it stimulates the synthesis of glucose from amino acids and other sources. So remember the ability of the body, of the liver especially, to use amino acids and the glycerol molecule to produce glucose. The beta cells, they produce the hormone insulin. Oh, and by the way, the target for glucagon is the liver. Beta cells produce insulin when blood glucose is high. And here the target cells are pretty much most of the cells of the body, but most of the work of bringing glucose into the body or into the cells is done by muscle cells, adipose tissue, and the liver. So those are the primary targets, but many cells are capable, and these are primary because they are capable of storing that extra glucose. Muscle cells can store it as, and the liver can store it as glycogen. The adipose tissue will store that energy out eventually as triglycerides, as dietary fat. So it stimulates the uptake of glucose into target cells, and then the conversion of that glucose in cells that can store it. Those are the muscles and the liver cells. Conversion of glucose into glycogen. And it also inhibits the production of glucose from these alternative glucose sources, or from alternative non-carbohydrate sources. So it prevents all of this production of glucose from amino acids and glycerol because we don't need it, and so it shuts down that particular function. So we see, and this is the last time you're going to hear me say it for this semester, I know you're happy about that. So if this is blood glucose, and this is time, after a meal, blood glucose rises. We see the release of insulin, telling all the body cells to store up the glucose, convert it into glycogen. Blood glucose falls as a response. As blood glucose comes outside of homeostasis, then we see the secretion here of glucagon that will break down glucose in the glycogen in the liver, releasing the stored glucose and bringing blood levels of glucose back up again. So all of this is, you know it, negative feedback, because each time we give it a shot of the appropriate hormones, we see the trend here, which is rising. Oops, glucose causes it to fall. Here the trend is that it's falling, and glucagon causes it to rise. Then last of all, somatostatin, or last of all for the pancreas, somatostatin is produced by the delta cells, and it inhibits overall secretion of insulin and glucagon. So this causes all of these hormones to lay down again and to step back and to stop production. So this is kind of the overall inhibitor of the effects of the endocrine function of the pancreas. The pineal gland, and I know people want to call it the pineal gland, but you pronounce it pineal, like pine tree, pineal, is found near the center of the brain, near to the thalamus, so up here, kind of embedded deep in the brain tissues, and it responds to light stimulation provided from the eyes. So when the eyes perceive light, then the pineal gland finds out about it. And in response to highlight, we see a reduction in melatonin secretion as the sun sets, and if we keep away from artificial light sources, television, the lights in your ceiling and so on, then we see an increase in melatonin production. So often thought of as the sleep hormone, this hormone is low in the day in the body and high in the dark hours. And while we don't clearly understand everything there is to know about melatonin, 3 roles have been suggested. Because of this, 2 roles. Let's step back to know where I got 3 from. But 2 roles have been suggested. The first role is about establishing this daily cycle in the body of rest and alertness. So we refer to that as the circadian rhythm. Circa means around. Dia, if you remember from taking Spanish, dia is day, so around the day, the rhythm of the day. And so in response to melatonin production, at night we see a decrease in metabolism. As melatonin falls in the body, we see an increase in metabolic processes. And it's also understood that it may have a real function in controlling the onset of puberty. And it may be melatonin that's behind the production of GnRH in the body as puberty comes on. Because what we see is, if this is child ages, and these are the adult ages, as children, we see cycling in melatonin up here, and then we see a decline, and then cycling in melatonin at a lower level in adults. So this decrease in melatonin is occurring at about the same time that puberty is occurring, so it's possible that it's also controlling the overall aging of the body into puberty. Thymus, this is the gland that's found right in the mediastinum, just behind the sternum. It's largest in children, becomes smaller with age. It produces thymosins that target lymphocytes, the T lymphocytes especially, and causes their maturation, and so that they can then perform all the functions that we talked about back when we were talking about the immune system. So T lymphocytes especially are affected by thymosins. And then finally, here it is, the very last slide. Don't be sad. So finally, we have all of the other organs that have a secondary endocrine function. Recall that, of course, the gonads and the reproductive organs all have a endocrine function as well as their function in reproduction. Testosterone produced by the testes, ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone, and the placenta produces a nice selection of hormones including estrogen, progesterone, and remember the signal that goes back to help maintain the corpus luteum, human chorionic gonadotropin. The digestive glands and organs they produce a large number of hormones as well as prostaglandins, including gastrin, secretin, and somatostatin. A very similar somatostatin, by the way, to the one produced by the delta cells of the pancreatic islets. The heart produces that atrial natriuretic peptide that is going to be responsible for a little bit of sodium regulation. The kidney produces erythropoietin That's EPO that is involved with red blood cell production, and renin, which is involved in blood pressure regulation with the renin-angiotensin story that we talked about back in the urinary system. And then adipose tissue produces leptin, that helps to stimulate or decrease appetite, as well as other hormones. So all of these organs have a secondary function as endocrine glands as well. Alright, so we have now talked about the pancreas, the thymus, the pineal gland, and all of the other organs that produce endocrine secretions. So as always, don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions, and we'll see you on Wednesday for the last exam of the year as well. So study well, and don't hesitate to look for me in office hours, both on Monday and Tuesday. Be good.